basically. Now, the other thing is that this same area is referred to in the stories of the the Anunnaki, as the Duku Mound. Now, this is a term which essentially means an occupational mound, like Gobekli Tepe, which we'll see. And it was on a mountain that was known as Karsag. And that mountain was said to be somewhere in the region of eastern Turkey. Okay, so this is the sort of area that we're dealing with. This is what I wrote about in this book. And the Garden of Eden, again, you think to yourself, well, surely this is somewhere that's purely mythical. Well, no. I mean, there are absolute strong traditions that the Garden of Eden was in the area of southeast Turkey. In fact, there are stories that it was actually beneath this huge inland lake called Lake Van, and that it was drowned there at the time of Noah's flood. But there are also traditions that it's in the area of Shanlurfa, which is only just a few miles away from Gobekli Tepe. But in the book of Genesis, it tells us that Eden, or the terrestrial paradise, was where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, two of the rivers of paradise, took their source. And there's another two rivers as well. There's debate over where they were, or which ones they are, but basically they are considered to be the Arxis River, which flows eastwards into, come back to me in a minute, and then the other river is the Greater Zarb, which flows out of eastern Turkey down into the Tigris River, and so that's the four, and that was known as one of the four rivers of paradise from the very early years of Christianity. The Syrian church, accepted that as one of the four rivers. So we know that we're talking about an area of eastern Turkey, basically. So, I mean, basically that's what it is. So it's obviously some, an artistic impression of what it looks like there. And I mean, this is essentially what I put in this book. But what I didn't know when I was writing this is that spades were going in the ground in the very area that I was talking about. I mean, I said that this is where you would find, the founders of human civilization, not realizing that at that very time that the first spades were going in the ground at Gobekli Tepe, which, as I said, it's about 8 miles from the city of Shanlurfa in southeastern Turkey. Shanlurfa itself used to be called Urfa, and in the Bible it's called Edessa, and it was supposedly the first city that where the king actually accepted Christianity. So it has that point of foundation. It became a very important pilgrimage site. Now, I was writing from the Ashes of Angels in the fall of 1995. And that's when the first spades were going in the ground. And of course, excavations continued at Gobekli Tepe right the way through to the year 2000. And that's when it was actually announced to the general public that it had been found. There was a huge spread in a German magazine. And of course, it was immediately brought to my attention. And I looked at it. And although I was already onto this culture by now, I thought, well, here we go. This is exactly what I expected to find in that area. And let's have a look at this. It's a huge complex of stone enclosures, which are essentially made of these dry stone perimeter walls, inside which you have a series of T-shaped pillars, which are all facing towards the centre. And in the centre of these enclosures, you have two huge great pillars. The ones you can see here, and I think there's pictures of them here, are 18.5 feet tall, probably weigh about 15 to 20 tonnes apiece. And the reason why they're T-shaped, it's not because that they are necessarily roof supports, although some people do believe that. It's because those T-shaped terminations are human heads. Basically, the front part of them is the human jaw coming out, and the extension at the back is either the fact they had elongated heads, which I do believe that they did, but also that they almost certainly had long hair that was tied up in some manner and was concealed beneath some kind of headdress, a scarf or something that extended out, very much like Muslim women wear. in Turkey, you see it. They see this extended bun where they've got their hair and obviously the hijab over the top of that. And that's very, very similar, I think, to what you had here. And I mean, there are actually many T-shaped pillars that have been found, one in particular that have more details than the actual pillars themselves, that it's quite clear that, you're talking about a jaw. Sorry about that. I was touching the wrong, I don't know what's going on there. And the rear part of it is quite clearly some kind of headdress or hairdo or elongated head, or all of them. And on these pillars, which are, as I say, meant to be anthropomorphic, in other words, spirits of humans basically within them, you have these most incredible carvings of creatures of the natural world. I mean, I've put a few names here: boars, snakes, cranes, foxes, aurochs, bulls, gazelles, lizards, scorpions, arachnids, lions, vultures, wolves, waders, flightless birds, and other things as well as that. And these are quite clearly, creatures that would have been known about by the builders of Gobekli Tepe, which, by the way, dates back to approximately 9,600 BC. That's the earliest enclosures, which is enclosure D, which I've shown you the pictures of just there. And it was occupied through until around 8,000 BC, when the last of the enclosures were covered over and the people that created it disappeared, basically. They almost certainly went into some other part of the ancient world, probably moving westwards through Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, into Europe, and eventually they would arrive in Western Europe and in Britain. They arrive in Britain probably about 4,000 BC. And it's almost certain that they were responsible for megalithic monuments all the way across Europe, basically. And of course they were going in other areas as well. They would have been going east, they would have been going south. But, our interest at the moment is that they're going west into Europe. You've also got three-dimensional representations aside from reliefs. One of the primary symbols you find at Gobekli Tepe and at Karahan is the leopard, which of course is a form of panther. I mean, they're basically the same animal. And you can see this incredible sculpture here, which you can see, and that's actually on the side of one of the T-shaped pillars. And to the right, you can see where they've actually sculpted a relief of a leopard, and they've actually shaped the stone to actually fit round the actual relief itself. And this is in a enclosure known as the Lion Pillar building. Although it's not a lion at all, almost certainly it is a panther leopard. And that was a very important symbol. Why is it important? Because it was a symbol of transformation or transfiguration into an animal form within an altered state of consciousness. The other big symbol was the vulture there. The vulture, again, is another symbol of transformation, of going into the spirit realm and entering not just the afterlife, but the sky world, quite literally. So these were the main form. Almost certainly these people would have been wearing these garments that would have been the paraphernalia of these creatures. They would have been wearing leopard skin pelts. They'd have been wearing cloaks of feathers, all the rest of it. Very much like the book of Enoch tells us about the Watchers. I mean, the idea that angels have wings is actually a relatively new idea. I mean, it goes back to the early centuries of Christianity. Before that, it does seem as if the texts say that they were wearing cloaks of feathers and that they could fly like birds. And it was when I read this that I realised you're dealing clearly here with shamans. And this was when I was doing the work on From the Ashes of Angels. So there we go, there's the Lion Pillars building there. So now, the guy that discovered Gobekli Tepe was Professor Klaus Schmidt from the German Archaeological Institute. You can see him there, surveying his discovery, basically. And he was a really interesting man. Unfortunately, he died in 2014, quite suddenly. And he believed that, and actually wrote this in the book, an incredible book he wrote about Gobekli Tepe, which is essentially out of print, but I mean, it should be, available freely, that Gobekli Tepe was the product of the Anuna, in other words, the Anunnaki. And he actually said that the Dooku Mound was Gobekli Tepe itself, and that Karsag was the Taurus Mountains on which Gobekli Tepe actually is placed. I mean, so that's incredible, because what he's saying is that the memory of Gobekli Tepe goes on to be remembered by the earliest Sumerians. So, I mean, that's really important. So this is a place of the Anunnaki. The other interesting thing is he said that in one interview that this was that the people that were responsible for creating it were the watchers of this place. Now, this was translated from an Italian, news or feature. Now, what did he mean by that? Did he mean the watchers of the Book of Enoch? I think he probably did. This guy was a really, really forward-thinking guy, and it's such a shame that he was taken from us and replaced by people that, in all honesty, are incredibly sceptical and hate me and hate my colleagues. I mean, seriously. I mean, I won't even go into it. But basically, I virtually got banned from Turkey for a while. Anyway, I first got out to Gobekli Tepe 4 years later in 2004. I was invited to a cultural festival in Diyarbakir, which is the administrative centre of southeast Turkey. And by that time, From the Ashes of Angels had been published in Turkish, and the Turkish people loved it. Well, mostly the Kurds, because I talked a lot about the Kurdish people in there. And that got me into trouble as well eventually. In fact, that was one of the reasons I got banned from Turkey for a while. And so whilst I was there, the mayor of Diyarbakir actually said to me, look, we appreciate what you're doing. Would you write another book that's saying that, this area is the cradle of civilization, really big it up, I said, yeah, sure. So I went back, came up with a few new theories, and in 2006, 2 years later, my book, The Cygnus Mystery, came out. And basically what that did was to suggest that the main enclosures at Gobekli Tepe were aligned towards the star Deneb in the constellation of Cygnus, which is also known as the Northern Cross. Cygnus itself is a bird, and we mostly know it in the West as a swan or a goose. But in the Middle East, it was almost always a vulture. And even today, in Armenian star lore, it's known as Anjek, which means the vulture, basically, which is interesting because Anjek is also the root of the word angel. I didn't know that when I wrote From the Ashes of Angels. I know it today. Which, in other words, this connection between vulture shamans and what we remember as almost like human flesh and blood angels was basically because of this fact that they wore these cloaks of vulture feathers, basically. Now, whilst I was over in southeast Turkey, I was allowed to go to various other sites as well, one of which was this incredible place called Harran, which was the ancient city of the peoples known as the Sabians or the Chaldeans. Now, they were thriving essentially at the time of the Romans, but they were infinitely older. And their knowledge of astronomy and astrology heavily influenced the Babylonians, heavily influenced the Greeks, and eventually, obviously, the Romans themselves. And I think that a lot of their ideas of astronomy and astrology came from these so-called Tashtepala sites, which is the official name that's given to these enclosures, these places, these sites that have T-shaped pillars. I mean, we now know that there's probably about 12 or 13 of them, of which the two most well known is Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. But it was whilst I was at Harran, where you got this incredible tower, by the way. This tower is thought to be the role model for the tower card of the tarot pack, if you're, you do stuff to do with tarot. And in fact, the other thing is that it may also have been behind the imagery on the moon card of the tarot pack. I mean, articles have been written about this. And it's interesting. I mean, the other thing about Harran is it was from here that the whole concept of Hermetica, the wisdom of Hermes, of the Egyptian mysteries, was actually born. And although the ideas were actually originated in Egypt, they were filtered through the Sabian peoples of Harran before they spread and obviously eventually reach Europe at the time of the Renaissance and are published for the first time. They come from Harran as well. So even though, as I said, there was, clearly an original Egyptian influence, they contain a lot of the knowledge and wisdom from Harran itself. Now, whilst I was at Harran, these kids came up to me and tried to sell me this second-hand guidebook of Harran. And I looked at it and I said, yeah, okay, and I bought it from them, and I just flicked it open. And there was this picture of a T-shaped pillar, like those at Gobekli Tepe, that it said had been recently discovered at a place called Karahan Tepe. And I thought, I've never heard of this. And I looked at this picture, which you can see here now. I looked at the side of it and I saw this snake crawling up the side of it, totally unlike anything at Gobekli. And I just thought, I've got to find this place. And it was in the Tepe Mountains. This is a map of the region. Right in the middle, you've got the Harran Plain. You can see where Harran is. You can see where Shamanic is on the top left. You can see where Gobekli Tepe is. And Karahan Tepe was in a very remote, or still is obviously, a very remote region called the Tepe Mountains. Okay? And I had a driver and an interpreter that had been given to me by the mayor of Diyarbakir for a whole week, and I said, I need to get there. I need to get to this place. So a couple of days later, we went to the Tepe Mountains and just asked around, and nobody had heard of this place. And I understand why now, because this name was created by the archaeologists that had found it to try and stop people going to the site and stealing things from it, because the local people do that, I'm afraid. They do it because they think they can get a little bit of money for it, and it's just one of those things. It didn't stop them. Apparently, I later learned from the people that own the farm there that, that people would just turn up, go on, start digging. And on one occasion, they actually knocked at the farmhouse and said, somebody help us, we're trying to move away one of these big T-shaped pillars. Is that all right? Anybody help us? And they said, no, we're not getting involved, So they had to just leave it. Thank God for that, basically. But that's the type of thing that was going on. Thank God they didn't, get too much. I obviously took away certain things. But anyway, so we eventually went out there. There's me looking really oddly at the camera, thinking, what the hell is going on here? But it's like, because now I'm at a new site like Gobekli Tepe, but it's completely unexcavated. And you've got here fragments of what they call porthole stones that look like something that would come out of a medieval cathedral or, a medieval townhouse or manor house or something like that, a mullion's window. And they're just lying about. And also, you've got T-shaped pillars just sticking up out of the ground. Now, on there you can see the one on the right has got a hole round it. This was either done by, the looters, or it was done by the archaeologists that actually found this site in the mid-1990s, although kept it quite clearly, as I say, called Bahattin Chelek. And he wrote a couple of papers about it. They're both online. You can download those. So, looking at this, I probably found about 20 to 30 T-shaped pillars. And the other thing is that everywhere were stone tools. Thousands and thousands of them all over the place, which is exactly what I'd also seen at Gobekli Tepe. Today, if you go to Gobekli, you can just drive up to it, and there's a huge, great visitor centre, and you get in a nice little minibus, and you go to the site. When I first went there was no one there. There was not even any roads. We had to abandon the car and walk up and down hills until we eventually arrived there. But as you got closer, the stone tools got more and more and more until they were everywhere. And this is something that's really, really important to remember, whether this was to do with the creation of the site, or whether these were offerings or whatever, when you find sites this age, you'll find stone tools. If you don't find stone tools, they are not of this age, okay? Because these people were very wasteful, clearly, in the tools that they use. So just bear that in mind. Okay, here's more examples of these porthole stones. You can see there two on the left that were discovered. And you can see what they look like. The one on the bottom right is from Gobekli Tepe. Sorry, sir.
Are you saying stone tools? Is that what
Stone tools, like scrapers and stuff like that. I mean, little stone tools. So this is what they look like. Now, they don't know whether these porthole windows were either in roofs, incredibly strong roofs, or whether they were upright to allow people to come into it. I think they were probably in the side walls. I don't think they were on roofs. There's a huge debate over whether there were roofs at Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. I mean, myself and my colleague Hugh Newman, who I work very, very closely with to do with this particular culture, so-called Tash Tepe. That means stone hills culture, by the way. The stone being clearly the fact they use stone, they're creating the T-shaped pillars, the hills, because clearly it's very hilly in this region. I mean, it's not a brilliant name, but that's what they call it today, Tash Tepe. So, you're finding this all over the place. Now, I mean, I went to Karahan a number of times from 2004. Probably 10, 12 more, exploring every single part of it. And I just knew there was something important here that would be found. But I didn't know what. But obviously, this is what it looked like back then, and this is what it looks like today. Archaeologists started working there in 2019 and started uncovering the most extraordinary stone enclosures, of which a small part of it you can see in this picture here. Here's one of the enclosures. This is what they call Structure AD, which we call the Great Ellipse, which has got these incredible stone buttresses at its eastern end. And they almost certainly had T-shaped heads. There were lots of T-shaped pillars, they believe possibly 18. And between these stone buttresses, I think I probably got some more pictures, but I'll just say, you've got these thrones where clearly people would have sat to watch the activities going on in front of them, okay? And this is arguably the most extraordinary structure of Tash Tepe that's been uncovered so far, because it's completely cut out of the bedrock. You have 10 pillars that are cut out of the bedrock that are admittedly very phallic in appearance. No, you have to accept that and see what's going on in there, the people's heads. And there's an 11th pillar, which is the one in the middle. I'm not going to move in case anything weird happens, which is actually curved in nature and would seem to be have placed there separately to the others. Sorry, sir.
So is it not possible that this is just a base and there was something else on top of it that's been destroyed?
Did you say a maze? Base. Oh, I see. No, because you can see that there was an area around the top of this enclosure, which is Structure AD, we call it the Pillar Shrine, where you would have had a roof. This is the one that we accept that there would have been a roof on this, and we think for a very, very important reason, which I'll come on to. But on the side wall, on the western wall of the Pillar Shrine, you have this extraordinary stone head. And this is possibly 3 times larger than a normal human head. So it's a giant head, or the head of a giant. And, I mean, weirdly enough, it almost looks like a sort of medieval helmet that this guy's wearing, but I don't think that that's the case whatsoever. I mean, it's just the way that it has been, carved a particular style. But what's so interesting is the mouth. The mouth is open, and you cannot help but look at it and think that it's trying to tell you something. It's speaking to you. And I think this was deliberately done, that this is communicating something to you. And if you're in an altered state of consciousness and you're looking at this, it is going to tell you something. And but the thing is that it's also on the end of a very long neck, and it's got lines on it that very clearly is serpentine in nature. So what we are dealing with here is some kind of what we refer to as a snake genius. In other words, a spirit in the form of a snake that has the head of a human. Why does it need the head of a human? Because of the belief that firstly the soul or the spirit resides in the head. So in other words, that's where the intelligence is, or the spirit is. But also, to communicate directly with us, a human head is needed so that it can speak verbally to us, communicate with us. Now, okay, that might be telepathic or in vision or whatever it is, but the head needs to be human for that type of communication to take place. And here's that original picture of the stone that was discovered in the 1990s. It was taken away, by the way. I think it's at Harran University. It's never been publicly displayed. And the reason why I show it for a second time is because there is snake imagery all over the place at Karahan. I mean, it is unquestionably the most important symbol. It's everywhere, in every enclosure, on T-shaped pillars, on stone vases that have discovered. It's obviously, it's on the walls, which I'll show you in a minute. So the snake was obviously very, very important to them. But why? Why the snake? What's going on with the snake? Okay. Well, I think one of the answers is that whilst you're in altered states of consciousness, and if you read books on, let's say, people that use ayahuasca, one of the first things that they see are snakes. Snakes crawling around trees or door frames or approaching them or even trying to enter inside of them. This is written by experts in psychedelics and whatever. I mean, obviously other animals as well, like the jaguar is an animal that a lot of people see in ayahuasca experiences. And of course, as I've said, the leopard was a very, very important symbol to these. And other than snakes, jaguars would seem to have been a very, very important symbol at Karahan as well. But definitely there's more snakes than leopards. So, obviously the snake meant a lot to them. It was obviously communicating with them. Obviously, they believed that this was some kind of snake genius, or that, snakes were important. But why? Let's find out. But anyway, a knowledge of this snake connection gives us, some kind of clue as to what is going on in connection with some of these other enclosures. Because here's the pillar shrine from above. And you'll notice that there's this incredible groove that goes towards the north and goes around this other shrine, which we'll come on to, which we call the pit shrine. And I wonder what this was. And somebody actually said on one of our tours, they said, oh, look, that the overhead image of that, it looks like a tadpole or maybe a human sperm, with the tail in the back. And I said, and I thought about this for a moment, and I said, yeah, but that can't be right, because quite clearly, if you're talking about a human sperm, they'd need a microscope for that, in theory, unless they're seeing it psychically, which maybe they were. So I sort of dismissed that idea, but then as it processed in my head, I thought, wait a minute, what if it's not a sperm, but a snake head? What if that is actually meant to be, the whole entire enclosure is a snake head, and the groove itself is the body of the snake? So I quickly did some research into the type of snakes that were in that area, and the one which is, believe it or not, one of the most common is a very poisonous snake called the Anatolian meadow viper. And we do know that bones of this particular snake have actually been found at Karahan Tepe. Now, the trouble is they can't tell how old it is because they're not sure whether it was, snakes were burrowing down into the ground. So, but anyway, we certainly know that snakes were on the site. So I wonder what would happen if I overlaid this head actually on the shrine to see what happens. And that's the result. Perfect match. However, what was even more interesting, of course, is that what I realised is that the groove wasn't the whole entire body, that was just above it. And you can see that how I've put in red here, that's the real body of that snake, and it curves around the other enclosure. I mean, clearly they couldn't do the whole snake because it would go on forever, but, you know, they've given the impression of the body there. And I think that this was done deliberately. In other words, the groove simply was there to accentuate the fact that the body of the snake was present as well. Now, as I said, this is the neighbouring structure there called Structure A, the pit shrine. And that also has snake imagery, and I'm going to apologise for the quality of this. But on the bench at the back of it, carved out of the bedrock, there is this long snake. It's probably about 10 feet long, really thin, and the head eventually goes up. I mean, you probably can't see that very well, but the head is going up towards the top of the frame there. And I wondered what would happen. That's the actual head. You know, I've tried to sort of ink in what the head looks like. Whether the actual pit shrine itself may also be the head of a snake. So I overlaid it, and that's perfect as well. So both of those shrines were meant to be snake heads. You know, this is the mindset of people here 11,000 years ago. So what the hell is going on here? I mean, you know, if these places are meant to be snake heads, then why would you want to go into a mouth of a snake? And the answer to that is to be consumed by the snake, to quite literally be eaten by the snake. And we can say this because at Gobekli Tepe, one of the big symbols there is the vulture. And the vulture is important because of the process known as sky burials. The idea that at death, the bodies, instead of just being buried or, you know, cremated, are left out on high spots to be picked clean by the vultures. And it would seem as if the belief was that the vultures would then carry the soul or spirit of the individual to the sky world, which is why the vulture became so important and became so important to do with the sky, you know, particularly the constellation of Cygnus. So something similar is going on here, but here it's in connection with a snake. And I began to realise that quite possibly they weren't just dealing with snakes in general, but they were dealing with some kind of primordial snake deity that they believed that you had to virtually be consumed by it, or you had to be consumed by it to actually be taken on some kind of journey to connect and communicate with it. And one of the points of communication quite clearly was this head in the pillar shrine. But what was this otherworldly snake? You know, I mean, could we go on to identify it? Well, one of the things that my colleagues, Hugh Newman and his partner, J.J. Ainsworth, discovered in December 2021 at the time of the winter solstice was that, I mean, they were there at the dawn, they were taking some pictures, they were there early because later that day officials were going to come to cover over this site, that just after dawn on the winter solstice, the sun comes through this hole, this window in the side of the pillar shrine and hits the head and illuminates it. An incredible sight, which they were able to, you know, to get photographs. They got it on film, everything. I've been back with them. I went back in 2022. We went there twice to witness this phenomena, and it's extraordinary. And this is one of the reasons why we were pretty certain that this did have a roof, so that it was even more spectacular. In other words, the shaman would have been in there before dawn, probably doing meditations or whatever, and then just after dawn, the light comes in, hits the head, illuminates it, and maybe this was a point where they would communicate with this snake deity. Or maybe it was just enlivening it, bringing it alive for some reason. I mean, of course, it could be connected with fertility and, you know, any other things. Remember, this place has these weird phallic pillars in it as well, which I think were part of some kind of experiential journey inside it, where you would have to go around these pillars in a certain way and then confront this head that would then communicate with you. You know, obviously, cosmic renewal was the idea that, obviously, we know that much later sites like Stonehenge or Newgrange in Ireland, which we'll be talking about later, also have these alignments towards the solstices, generally at dawn, where the light pierces through and hits something, or, you know, you can look from the interior of it, like at Stonehenge, and see the sun rise precisely over the heel stone as you look out from it at the time of the summer solstice. So, I mean, this was an incredible discovery that they made. But one of the reasons why they were there at this time is that they thought that something might be going on, because 2 months earlier, in September, or beginning of October 2021, which was just days virtually after the first images came out of what they discovered at Karahan Tepe, I discovered something else, an alignment towards the summer solstice, because I'd worked out that the orientation of the pit shrine was approximately 302 degrees, okay? And that takes you in the general direction of the sun as it sets at the time of the summer solstice, not the winter solstice, 6 months later or before the winter solstice. And so we checked on Stellarium, which is this free, you know, sky program that you can check the skies going back to any age, and sure enough, the sun set precisely in line with the actual pit shrine. And there's no question in my mind that that was aligned to the sunset at the time of the summer solstice. But I kept clicking to see what would happen after that. And after it gets dark, a matter of 2.5 hours after sunset, you have this, which is the Milky Way vertically rising up into the air, into sky, from exactly the same spot. And I just thought, this is just too coincidental. In other words, the sun going down was almost the preparation for what was going to happen once it gets dark, and that is that you've got the Milky Way there, and the Milky Way would have been seen as almost like some kind of road into the sky world, as it was for many different cultures around the world. In Mesoamerican tradition, the Maya, in Peruvian tradition, amongst the Inca, the Milky Way, particularly at the time of the solstices, was seen to be the path that you reach the sky world. But the thing was, it wasn't just any spot on the Milky Way that was there in plain sight at this time, around 11,000 years ago. It was the area of the constellations of Sagittarius, Ophiuchus, which is often known as the 13th sign of the zodiac, and just setting at this time was Scorpius. And what I realised is that not only is this one of the 2 points on the Milky Way that the sun crosses the Milky Way, the other being in the area of Orion and Gemini and Taurus and the Pleiades, but that this also marked the centre of our own galaxy. And that's marked by the brightest area of the Milky Way, which is known as the galactic bulge. And I started to think, well, has this got some connection with this primordial deity in the form of a snake? And I realised eventually what that snake was. And it's the Milky Way itself. The Milky Way has been seen as a snake universally around the world, as far as everywhere. Let's say we're obviously in America here. Native American tradition saw this as a world-encircling snake. You find it in India. You find it in Scandinavia, in the Norse myths. You find it all over, essentially. I mean, all right, there are different variations of the story. You find it in Greece. And quite clearly it's there in the Middle East. There are people there, an indigenous religion in the same area as Gobekli Tepe, even to this day, called the Yazidi. And their main symbol is this black snake. Well, well, one of them, the other one's the peacock, angel, but it's this black snake. And the Yazidi believed in a world encircling snake. And I'm pretty certain that their use of that symbol is for this reason, that it's a memory from this much earlier time. And this goes into Mesopotamian tradition and is shown alongside planets and constellations. You can see here on this particular stone, which is known as Kuduru stone, which were used for boundary markers. You can see the various constellations there. We won't worry about which ones they are, although quite clearly you can see Scorpius there, and the 7 stars or 7 dots to its right is the Pleiades. But the snake originally was the Milky Way, and certain experts that have looked into Mesopotamian astronomy have come to this conclusion. It was later changed to a constellation called Hydra, but just for clarity there. But it was originally the Milky Way. But of course, where was the head? Well, the head was quite clearly the galactic bulge, the brightest part of it, which corresponds to the constellations of Sagittarius, Ophiuchus, and Scorpius. And this is a very bright area, and today we hardly even see the Milky Way. I mean, yes, if you go into the deserts, you'll be able to see it, but the galactic bulge in the past was incredibly bright. And they focused on that as the head. Now, why would they be interested in the head? Because it's the spirit, it's where the spirit or the soul of this snake would be. They didn't care too much about the rest of the body, other than the fact that that was part of the regulation of cyclic time, in my opinion. But it's the head that they wanted to focus on, because that is where the intelligence was. That was where the spirit of this cosmic snake or great serpent was actually placed. So this is the reason why the pit shrine was aligned towards that particular spot on the Milky Way, so that they could use this as a launch pad to go to the Milky Way serpent and communicate with it. That's what that great head is in the pillar shrine. It represents the head of the Milky Way serpent, basically. Obviously, I thought I'd throw this in. Serpent Mound, Ohio. Now, this is aligned to the summer solstice sunset, but William Romain, an archaeoastronomer that's written many papers and books on the astronomy of Native American tradition, says that, in his opinion, the Serpent Mound is aligned towards Scorpius. It is a representation of the constellation of Scorpius. And Scorpius is aligned due south at the point of the summer solstice when it sets. And he believes that that Serpent Mound is Scorpius. And I think that that's absolutely correct. That represents the active spirit of the Milky Way serpent. And that the Native American peoples, who created this, probably the Adena culture, before even the time of Christ, were also into exactly the same thing, and that's what Serpent Mound represents. And these ideas to do with this cosmic snake is something that is handed down, I think, from Karahan Tepe through places like Harran, where you have the Chaldean or Sabian astronomers and astrologers, until it eventually filters down into various mystery cults in Greek tradition, particularly those associated with Orpheus, until eventually they're adopted by the Gnostics, who were for the most part Christian, although we use that term lightly, and what they believed in was this cosmic serpent, which they called the Great Serpent or the Good Serpent. There was a certain amount of confusion that had come in by now as to what part of the sky it was, but it's quite clearly the same thing. And what they believed was that it was associated with something beyond the actual snake itself, that the snake was a manifestation of something even more primordial. And they referred to it well, and I'm going to use terms which academics refer to it today, and that's the supernal sun or the hypercosmic sun, the sun behind the sun. And almost certainly this is associated with the Milky Way serpent and quite clearly the head of it, because that head corresponds to the centre of our Milky Way galaxy. And what do we have at the centre of the Milky Way galaxy? A supermassive black hole sitting in the darkness, and it's known as Sagittarius A star. I mean, to call it a black hole is probably doing it an injustice. This is far, far more than simply, a black hole just sucking in matter. Almost certainly, it creates matter as well. And some of the recent theories suggest that it may even be responsible for creating all matter, or certainly most of it, in the Milky Way galaxy. It creates stars, and is probably still doing it to this day. And is it possible, therefore, that the people at places like Karahan Tepe in particular, and I use Karahan Tepe because Gobekli seems to be something slightly different. I mean, the way that I see Gobekli Tepe, it's almost like a cathedral, like a Christian cathedral, where you go into a cathedral, you've got loads of little side chapels dedicated to different saints, the Virgin Mary, St. Michael or whatever, and then obviously you've got a high altar. And it's a place where lots of people go and sit down, and it's a huge place. To me, that's like Gobekli Tepe. But Karahan Tepe is where these people were going deep. They were going deeply into something. And I think that it was to find the source of everything. They knew they had a connection with the stars, and they were trying to find exactly what that was and get answers. And those answers came in knowledge and wisdom from the active spirit of the Milky Way serpent. But, of course, they were concentrating on the centre of our own galaxy. Now, whether they realised that or not, I don't know. But what I can say is that many ancient cultures would appear to have been aware of the importance of that area of sky, as if they did realise that it was the centre of everything, certainly the centre of our galaxy, and that we should be focusing our attentions on it. This is the only image that we've got so far of that supermassive black hole. It looks like a donut, I know. But it's there. It gives out light. That's plasma coming out from it. And, I mean, what did the ancients know relating to this? This is an image that's going in my new book, Karahan Tepe, which is coming out in October. So watch out for that. Now, this was done by my artist friend, Russell Hussain. And this is what we think was going on there. I mean, we've got two female shamanesses here. They're wearing leopard skin, garments around them. There's obviously other figures here sitting on, these incredible thrones. There's obviously a guy watching over what's going on. Maybe he's waiting for the interpretation of what's coming out from the shamanesses. And I think that this was a place of, like an oracle place, a place of prophecy, very similar to the Delphic Oracle. In fact, there are links. I mean, I've got a whole chapter on the Delphic Oracle in there, which is the more refined version. The Delphic Oracle was a priestess who would sit over these fumes coming out of the earth, supposedly of this dead serpent called Typhon, and this would intoxicate the priestess, and the god Apollo would then supposedly speak through her. But what's so interesting, it wasn't just a god Apollo like some Greek god. He came in the form of a snake. So quite clearly you're talking about a cult that's very, very ancient, and the connection with Apollo probably came at quite a late time. In other words, this was almost certainly a female site associated with prophecy and oracular communication on the same par as Karahan Tepe, but from a later period. And I do believe there are links between the two sites. But that is what was going on at Karahan. I'm pretty certain of that. So is there a real intelligence behind these contacts with the centre of our galaxy? Well, the answer seems to be yes. Rupert Sheldrake is one of the great freethinkers of our time, basically. I mean, he's come out with so many different incredible ideas, and his latest one, published in a paper which was, I can't remember which year it was, I think it was either 2020 or 2021, was looking at the idea that our sun could be conscious, but also within this paper he talks about the supermassive black hole at the centre of our galaxy, which is called Sagittarius A star, and he said this, he believed, was a conscious being in its own right, and that he referred to its influence as the Galactic Mind, and that this Galactic Mind might almost be seen as almost like an AI-like intelligence. And I don't mean that in technical terms, I mean it on quantum terms, of the way that it may still be affecting life within the universe, within the galaxy itself. In other words, all life that exists within it. I mean, this is an incredible concept, and one which I actually, as I'll show you now, is almost certainly, I think, true. And the idea of the galactic mind and the idea that our sun and the supermassive black hole could be conscious comes from something in science that is referred to as panpsychism. And this is something that's very popular, particularly amongst philosophers, that everything has consciousness. Everything, this, my computer, everything, but up to and including supermassive black holes, presumably. I mean, obviously the idea is general, and what Rupert Sheldrake is doing is taking it one step further by including, the supermassive black hole at the centre of our own galaxy. So in some strange way, you could almost see this galactic mind as almost like a localized form of God himself. As this omnipresent intelligence that exists, that may well be communicating or connecting with us now, and has been since the beginning. So, anyway, what's so interesting, as I said, is that the Orphites, the Orphites were the name given to the type of Gnostics that were heavily into snakes, basically. They had a mystical rite where they would have live snakes. They would, have them, and they would actually allow them to go within the bread and the wine to consecrate them or whatever. And then they would take this bread and they would go into this mystical rite and they would connect with this supernal sun and its manifestation as the good serpent, basically. And these ideas continue to exist in alchemical tradition, but also amongst the so-called Rosicrucians. There's these sort of occultists and mystics of the 17th century, one of whom was Robert Fludd. He talks all about this in this book that was published in 1617, and he actually represents this supernal sun on several occasions in this book. One of which is this. And, when I see this, I mean, to me, this is not just some kind of, hypercosmic sun behind the sun, but this quite clearly a black hole that's radiating its energy out, its plasma that is going on to create atomic matter that's creating the universe as a whole. Because quite clearly, this isn't the only galaxy. There are countless galaxies. And in theory, most, if not all, of them have supermassive black holes at their centre. They may even be the point of contact into higher dimensional realms, and that's bringing in the stuff that creates the atomic matter. So, in other words, the expansion of the universe is not simply a case of the Big Bang and then it's all going outwards, but it's being created all the time from much smaller Big Bangs, if you like, or certainly the source of the atomic matter, which are the supermassive black holes at the centre of these galaxies. So, what signs must we look for the identity of the presence of this galactic mind? In other words, can we go on to identify it? What does it look like? Does it look like a human or an octopus? I mean, what does it look like, basically, if we want to try and identify it, if, let's say, it comes to us in our dreams? So, the answer is geometry for the moment, and a particular shape. And that shape is the dodecahedron. The dodecahedron is, and we'll come on to, well, let's show you here. Now, what I'm showing you here is groundbreaking scientific studies into the formation of atomic matter from plasma coming out of a supermassive black hole. Not our one called M87, Messier 87. This work by this inspired theoretical physicist by the name of Harry Karahan from Germany. I think it's just extraordinary stuff, and this is just the beginning. And he basically, what he's saying is that what you're seeing here is the structure or fabric of the universe itself, what's behind the matter. It's almost like the framework that allows the creation of physical matter in this universe. And this is the dodecahedron. It's got 12 faces, each of which have 5 sides, so it's like a pentagon. It's got 20 vertices, which obviously are the corners, and 30 sides, or edges, if you like. And that's what it looks like. We'll talk about this quite a bit, but basically, it's also been detected within what's known as the cosmic microwave background. Now, the cosmic microwave background is essentially the radiation that's left behind, even to this day, from the Big Bang. In other words, there was a Big Bang, in theory. Well, at the beginning, obviously, as we talked about, there's probably smaller Big Bangs going on at the time. But it leaves behind this radiation, and this has been recorded and mapped, particularly on infrared levels, because obviously that is heat. And this, what they found within it are certain shapes, certain geometric patterns. The British physicist and scientist Roger Penrose has been studying this, and he believes that it could even be the evidence of the presence of another universe which collapsed at the time of the creation of our own. Now, that may or may not be the case. I don't want to really go there in this lecture on that, but it's an interesting idea. But look at this. Look, this is what's been detected. Now, when I saw this, I thought, oh my God, I saw this and I thought, this is dodecahedral. I can see this already, because if you put a flat plan dodecahedral, what I mean by that is one that's just outlined and you look at it and you see it in 2 dimensions, that happens. That's a perfect fit in geometry. So, in other words, this is another piece of evidence to show this dodecahedral structure to our universe. Okay? And it goes beyond that, because the dodecahedron is seen to be the interface between our 3 dimensions of space and one of time and higher dimensional states, going up probably from the 4th dimension of space upwards, right the way probably to 11 dimensions in total. So 10 of space, if you like, 1 of time. I mean, there are other ideas, there may be even higher amounts of dimensions, but let's keep it low for the moment. Let's say there's 11. And basically what the dodecahedron is it's the interface, the step up or stepping down framework between our space-time and these higher dimensional realms. Okay? I mean, here's a paper here. This is a real paper. You just read it online, you take the details of it. And this is the sort of thing that they're looking at. The fact that, that behind the fabric of our universe, in these higher dimensional states, is a framework. And what they call this higher dimensional realm is the bulk. It's an 11-dimensional realm. And that within it, what are known as brains, B-R-A-N-E, or brain worlds, come into being. They like blow up and they become what we'd call universes. Our universe is one of those brains. And those brains have their own laws of physics. Our laws of physics are that we have 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. Others might have other laws. But what's so interesting is that the theories, the theoretical ideas behind the idea of the bulk and the blowing up of these brains or universes is that they can touch each other. And what I mean by that is they can literally, come close to each other, or they can either overlay each other, perhaps even on a temporary basis, and then, part again. And that's really interesting, and that takes us into areas of parallel worlds and parallel universes and whatever, which again is beyond the remit of the slideshow today. But this is essentially that. And it's basically called the Poincare dodecahedral space, basically. I'm not going to go into Poincare, but he was the guy that started to look at the idea that space must have what he calls a regular topography. In other words, a tiling. In other words, that there is some kind of structure behind it. He started to look at it in terms of spheres and stuff and set certain parameters. And this whole subject was not really solved until about the year 2000 by some brainbox guy in Russia who was, awarded this prize of $1 million and, all sorts of scholarly positions or whatever for finally solving the Poincare conjecture. And he said, no, I'm all right, I don't need the money, I don't want to do anything, I'm just going to carry on doing my own thing, in Russia. Obviously quite an odd person, but, a brilliant mind. Now, Platonic solids. Plato, we know, lived around 360 BC, that's when he thrived. Was the first person to really write down the idea that you can use 2-dimensional geometrical forms to create 3-dimensional forms. You can see them going up here from a tetrahedron through to octahedron, hexahedron, isosahedron, to the most complex that you can have, which is the dodecahedron, which is the 5th state. Some people refer to it as the almost like the 5th element, ether, basically itself. As I said, it's the connection between our physical and the non-physical. It is the symbol of that. He wrote about it, but he also wrote, and I quote here, one construction still remained, dodecahedron, the 5th, and God used this in order to embroider shapes upon the universe. So this is Plato saying this in 360 BC. He's saying that the structure of the universe is dodecahedral. Now, whether this was just a lucky hit or what, I don't know. I mean, obviously he was a clever man, clearly. I mean, he was a guy that gives us Atlantis as well, for instance. And possibly the fact that the Earth may be, circular or going around the sun or whatever, just different ideas, but let's not go there again. But he wasn't the guy that really put dodecahedrons on the map. It was this guy here. His name is Hippasus, or Hippasus. And unfortunately, this guy was a follower of Pythagoras, and we know his interest in mathematics and geometry. And he was the first person to basically say to everybody, hey, everybody, dodecahedrons, really, really, really important. They're the key to everything. So they bumped him off, basically. They took him out on a boat. Said, hey, Hippasus, would you like to come on a fishing trip with us? Yeah, it'd be a great idea. Push. Serious, that's the story, that he was killed because he revealed the secrets of the dodecahedron. Read about it. So, sorry about that. But so where did this idea come from? Did Pythagoras therefore come up with the importance of the dodecahedron in probably 500, 550 BC? No, of course not. The Neolithic people were into this as early as 3000 BC and arguably much, much earlier. What you see in front of you now is what's known as petrospheres, stone balls that were created by the Neolithic peoples of Scotland, particularly the Orkney Isles. And these people, I can show, and there's articles online that I've already done, to show that these are the descendants of the peoples that created Karahan Tepe and Gobekli Tepe. And they created these stone balls. I mean, there are hundreds of them. But what they did was to create the Platonic solids with them, of which the one in the centre, very clearly, is a dodecahedron. And this was work that was done by a very inspired Earth Mysteries researcher and writer by the name of Keith Critchlow. This came out in the 1970s in a book, which is very difficult to get down, very expensive. But you know, he had this picture in there, and he was basically saying that the Neolithic people had this understanding of geometry. So, I mean, that's incredible in itself. And as I say, there are hundreds of these stone balls. Almost all of them, except for 3, have been found in Scotland, mostly in the Orkney Islands, in Scotland, which obviously shows that that's where they were being manufactured. Only 3 have been found south of the border, 2 in Cumbria, and 1 at a place called Bridlington in Yorkshire. I happen to know that because I've been researching that. But now, what are these stone balls? Why did they create them? You know, was it just to represent, the Platonic solids and other pretty spherical things? No, of course not. Almost certainly, these are handheld points of focus. They take the place of what we would call icons or idols, basically. Instead of having an anthropomorphic little statue and connecting your God with that, you've got the stone ball. So why would you do that? Well, because possibly of what you see on the screen here on the left. This is a 2-dimensional view of a multi-dimensional form or construct known as a Celebi-Yale manifold. And this is how theoretical physicists and mathematicians believe that higher dimensions are represented in what they call a compactified form. Because what they believe is that even though we live in a 3-dimensional realm of space and one of time, that around us is the other dimensions, but they're just compactified, like screwed up like a little piece of paper. And that the form that they take is spherical, like this. Or, this particular example, although not the only type, is 10-sided. I mean, whether that's pure coincidence or not, that's something I still need to look into. But you can see the likeness between these Celebi-Yale manifolds and these stone balls. So is it possible that the Neolithic peoples were entering into altered states of consciousness and seeing these Celebi-Yale manifolds and coming back and saying, I think I saw something that was speaking to me, some kind of intelligence, and it looked like a ball. And they've created it as points of these balls, these petrospheres, as points of contact with these entities, or one entity, or whatever, maybe more, maybe one, maybe we don't know, okay? So, who were the creators of these petrospheres? Well, they're known as the Ware culture, because they created these lovely little bowls here with obviously these grooves on them, and you find them on the Orkney Islands, but you also find them in other parts of the country, which shows that the Ware culture began their journey originally in the Orkney Islands, which is where you find, for instance, the oldest stone circles in Britain. This is the stones of Stennes, these beautiful standing stones. This is the Ring of Brodgar, incredible, one of the largest stone circle complexes in Britain. I say it's in the Orkney Islands on the Orkney mainland. So these were the megalithic builders, and they spread from the Orkney Islands into other parts of the British Isles. And that includes Ireland, Newgrange, the Boyne Valley. They came down, as I said, Bridlington, of all places. That's not, well, there is some megalithic stuff there, including the tallest monolith in the country. But they also came down to the area of Avebury, which is this massive stone circle complex in the county of Wiltshire in southern England, and also Stonehenge. some of the pottery that's been found close to Stonehenge, a place called Durrington Walls, is identical to that found in the Orkney Islands. And it's quite clear that the founders of Stonehenge, certainly as a stone monument, I mean, there's some wooden stuff that was going on there that goes back to 8000 BC, but let's not worry about that today, were the Grooveware culture. Now, obviously it goes through different phases, but the Grooveware culture founded it. They set down the ground plan for Stonehenge, okay? Where we find evidence of higher dimensional structure and form. And this is going to blow your minds. Hopefully it will anyway. I mean, this is what Stonehenge used to look like, okay? And what I want you just to be aware of is not only the fact that you've got the stone monuments in the centre here, but you've got this earthen circular bank around the outside. And you have these 4 stones that are marked here, which are known as the station stones. And what the station stones do is help mark the different risings and settings of the moon in relationship to the sun. We'll show you how that works as we go on. But they are 90 degrees out from the sun rising at the time of the solstice or setting at the time of the winter solstice. I mean, we all know about the sun rising at Stonehenge, yeah? At midsummer, all the Druids go there, thousands of people go there to wait for the sun to rise, and it rises up over this megalith called the Hillstone, okay? Well, it's done that since, well, probably 3000 BC. So it's an integral part of it. It's about synchronizing, you know, your life, the life of your community, the country as a whole, with the movement of the heavens and the cycles of the sun itself, okay? So that's basically what it looks like. And that's what Stonehenge looks like from the air. You can see the stones in the middle. You can just about make out the banks and the ditches around it. You can see all the little people walking around it, which is what you have to do. You go around in circles there now. You can't actually go in it unless you go on a private tour, which you can do first thing in the morning, last thing at night. And weirdly enough, it's only I mean, to get into Stonehenge today, it's about 35 quid a person, right? 35 pounds. That's a lot of money. But if you go on a private tour, it only costs about something like 80 quid per person, and you go in amongst the stones. So if you ever go to Stonehenge, go on a private tour. I promise you it's a much better experience, and it's worth paying the money to do so. But anyway, let's get back to this. So this is the overhead. This is just a Google Earth image of it. But I want to show you how it relates to the dodecahedron. It is perfectly matched on it. Here's one example, an extended form, which we call which is known as the star polygon form of the dodecahedron. That highlights the position of the stones, or the outer ring of the so-called sarsen stones. That's there, so it perfectly highlights those. But let's take it in now to where those station stones are. It perfectly highlights the stones still. Perfectly highlights 2 of the station stones, stone 91 and 93, and there's stone 92 and 93, so you've got all 4 there, okay, 91, 92, 93, 94, and what's known as the lunation rectangle that is created by the 4 station stones is perfectly marked out within that dodecahedron, you can see there. And that gives us the line to the summer solstice at sunrise, perfectly. And the other important point to remember about Stonehenge is that the position of it, its latitude, is absolutely unique, because it's the only place where the extreme risings of the moon are at 90 degrees away from the sun rising at the time of the winter solstice and setting at the time of the summer solstice and setting at the time of the winter solstice. It wouldn't happen at any other latitude. It has to be exactly that spot. That's clearly one of the reasons why Stonehenge is where it was. And remember these people, the Grooveware culture, doing this. Right, let's carry this on. Here is the overhead plan of Stonehenge. You know, all the different features there. We don't need to worry about it. I mean, it's made of 2 different types of stones. The blue stones, which came all the way from Wales, and the sarsen stones, which are the big trilithons that you see They come from a site probably about 15 miles away. Right, let's carry on here. Perfectly framed is the actual stones themselves again, like that. And here they are. And once again, the lunation rectangle is perfectly framed within it. There's the 4 station stones, completing that right through the dead centre. So there's the dodecahedron in it again. And just to complete it, this is a very old plan of what it looked like in the past. There's the dodecahedron. You see how it perfectly frames them, perfectly frames the circle, and from the outside, it's just a perfect match. Just absolute perfect match. And it's a perfect match to what we see in the cosmic microwave background. It's exact. It's the same thing. And obviously what we see in terms of the supermassive black holes, M87 in this case, and hopefully the same structure is there with other supermassive black holes at other parts of the universe. So is the supermassive black hole Sagittarius A at the centre of the Milky Way galaxy the source of higher dimensional contact? You know, and is it one of its prime symbols, the dodecahedron? So were sites like Karahan, Tepe and Stonehenge points of contact with higher dimensional intelligences that begin with the centre of our own Milky Way galaxy? I believe the answer is yes. How might this knowledge be used to help connect us with the galactic mind? The answer is sound. Let me show you why. And I have to thank my colleague, J.J. Ainsworth, for this, for working this out in 2018. And what's so weird is that she's the partner of my good friend Hugh Newman. We go on tours together, everything. And they live just a mile away from Stonehenge. So she almost certainly was coming up with this, sitting in a house a mile away from Stonehenge. It was obviously speaking to her. What you see on the left are bronze dodecahedrons, handheld, or I mean, let's say, you know, they fit nicely in a hand, that were made during Roman times in Britain, and a few have been found in Belgium. And the archaeologists have no idea what they are, none whatsoever. Another one was recently found in the county of Lincolnshire, and they are just a total mystery. There are dozens of theories as to what they represent, one of which is that they were used for knitting gloves. Now, I've no idea, and I don't care, because, you know, people that have been asked who knit gloves say there's far easier ways of putting, you know, the wool or whatever it is through holes. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Other theories are that they're a child's toy or something. No. These are Roman representations of dodecahedrons, which were almost certainly the same as the petrospheres of the Neolithic people. This is just an advanced form of a petrosphere. But what's so interesting, and what JJ worked out, is that the dodecahedral shape is found in somatics. Somatics is the patterns that are created through sound frequencies that are shown in light. And you can see this perfect example here that is dodecahedral. And what's so important about this is I think this is everything to do with Stonehenge itself. Because just a few years ago, obviously in 2020 here, it was announced Stonehenge enhanced sounds by like voices and music for people inside the monument. In other words, it was perfectly created. So I've just 2 more slides, I think, or just a couple anyway. And this was work that was done at the University of Salford. And here's me with Professor Trevor Cox, the Acoustics Research Laboratory, Salford University, you know, examining this and going over this with this scale model of Stonehenge that he used to do this, basically to show that this was basically a sound produced, you know, in other words, this was perfectly created to generate sound. And this is the symbol. you know, we need to work on this. We need to understand this. This is still ongoing research. You know, this is a dodecahedron created through cymatics, through the patterns of sound. And here is the geometry of the dodecahedron. It's perfect, once again. So is this the key to contact with Galactic Mind? Is a cymatic frequency structure of the dodecahedron. And this is where we go next. Thank you very much. And just to finish off, so this is my book, Karahan Tepe. It's coming out in October. Watch out for that, Inner Traditions. We go to Turkey twice a year, May and September. Why not come along with us? All details on andrewcollins.com, my website, or megalithomania.co.uk. Here's some of my books. We're selling them over the back if you're interested. And my last book was The First Female Pharaoh, all about a lady called Sobek-Neferu. She was the first woman that ruled Upper and Lower Egypt. And we're going to Egypt in November. So if you want details of that, andrewcollins.com. And that's it, really. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of the event. Cheers. Oh, and very important, if you happen to be here on Monday and you happen to want to spend 3 hours in my company going over all this intensively, as that's what it's called, then I am here from 11 o'clock. When I say here, I mean whatever room it is. It's 11 o'clock, intensive. We'll go over all this and a lot more then. So hopefully see some of you there. Okay, cheers. Thank you.
I'm going to send you some more information. I have to run, but my late husband was one of the foremost piano restorers in the world.
It was when... Oh, sorry. Let me get this off. All right, I've got... we'll sort this out in a minute. Right. Okay, let me get my stuff and we can go to the back of the room. So, all right, let's get all my gear out of the way. Okay, that's mine. Okay. That's mine. Right, what else looks alien here? That's yours. Right, is that all? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right, thank you for your time. Yeah, let's try and sort that out.
I can make it easy too.
Yeah, okay. Right.